In 1948, the world witnessed a landmark event, the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This document, born from the ashes of World War II, proclaimed the inherent dignity and equality of all human beings. It enshrined fundamental rights including freedom from torture, freedom of speech, and the right to a fair trial. The UDHR stands as a beacon of hope, a testament to the aspiration for a world where justice and human dignity prevail over oppression and tyranny. It serves as a universal standard, a yardstick against which the actions of nations are measured. However, the lofty ideals enshrined in the UDHR often clash with the realities of international politics, particularly when it comes to the actions of powerful states. The United States, despite being a vocal proponent of human rights on the world stage, has a complex and often contradictory record when it comes to upholding these principles. This essay will explore the contradictions inherent in U.S. policy, examining instances where its actions diverge from its stated commitment to human rights. The United States stands as a global superpower, wielding immense influence on the world stage. Its power is multifaceted, encompassing military might, economic dominance, and diplomatic clout. Militarily, the U.S. possesses the most formidable armed forces in the world, with a global network of military bases and a vast arsenal of conventional and nuclear weapons. Economically, it boasts the largest economy, driving global trade and shaping international financial institutions. Diplomatically, the U.S. holds a prominent position in international organizations like the United Nations and exerts significant influence over global affairs. This power, however, is a double-edged sword. The U.S. military interventions, often justified in the name of national security or humanitarian intervention, have sometimes resulted in significant civilian casualties and instability. Its economic policies, while benefiting certain segments of the global population, have also been criticized for perpetuating inequality and exploiting developing countries. Understanding the complexities of U.S. power is crucial to comprehending the contradictions inherent in its foreign policy. It is essential to scrutinize the gap between rhetoric and reality, between the U.S. stated commitment to human rights and its actions on the world stage. The dissonance between the U.S. espoused values and its actions is evident in its foreign policy decisions. The U.S. has a history of supporting authoritarian regimes when it serves its strategic interests. From Latin America during the Cold War to the Middle East for oil, realpolitik often trumps human rights. The War on Terror, launched after 9/11, is another example. Framed as necessary, it led to human rights violations like torture and indefinite detention. Drone strikes in countries like Pakistan and Yemen have been condemned as breaches of international law. These actions undermine the values the U.S. claims to uphold. The treatment of Central American migrants at the southern border exposes further hypocrisy. These inconsistencies erode the U.S. moral credibility on the world stage. Such contradictions fuel anti-American sentiment and hinder efforts for a just world. One of the most glaring contradictions in U.S. policy lies in its continued reliance on nuclear deterrence. The U.S. possesses the largest nuclear arsenal in the world and remains committed to the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, a strategy that relies on the threat of nuclear annihilation to deter adversaries. While proponents argue that nuclear deterrence has prevented major wars since World War II, the very existence of these weapons poses an existential threat to humanity. The catastrophic consequences of a nuclear war are undeniable. Even a limited nuclear exchange would have devastating humanitarian and environmental consequences, potentially triggering a global nuclear winter. The indiscriminate nature of nuclear weapons makes it impossible to reconcile their use with the principles of proportionality and distinction enshrined in international humanitarian law. Furthermore, the U.S. insistence on maintaining its nuclear arsenal while urging other countries to forego such weapons smacks of hypocrisy. The U.S. continued modernization of its nuclear arsenal and its reluctance to engage in meaningful disarmament talks undermine global efforts to create a nuclear-free world. The U.S. nuclear posture presents a fundamental moral dilemma. Can a nation truly champion human rights while simultaneously threatening the very existence of humanity? The U.S. must reconcile its nuclear policy with its stated commitment to human rights by pursuing a path of nuclear disarmament and working to eliminate the threat of nuclear war once and for all. The Biden administration has embarked on an ambitious industrial policy aimed at revitalizing the U.S. economy and bolstering its competitiveness on the world stage. This policy seeks to strengthen domestic manufacturing, invest in research and development, and create jobs in key sectors like clean energy and advanced technology. However, it relies heavily on protectionist measures such as subsidies for U.S. companies and tariffs on imports. These policies risk triggering trade wars and undermining free trade principles. Biden's focus on U.S. technological dominance raises concerns about a technological decoupling with China. This could stifle innovation and cooperation, ultimately harming global progress. Striking a balance between promoting domestic growth and upholding a fair international economic order is crucial. The United States has long viewed its network of alliances as a cornerstone of its foreign policy, crucial for maintaining global stability and promoting its interests abroad. These alliances, forged during the Cold War and expanded in the post-Cold War era, provide the U.S. with strategic depth, military basing rights, and diplomatic support. The U.S. relies on its allies to share the burden of global security, counter common threats, and uphold the rules-based international order. However, the U.S. reliance on military alliances, particularly NATO, has been criticized for perpetuating a Cold War mentality and fueling global militarization. NATO's expansion eastward, despite promises made to Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, has heightened tensions with Moscow and contributed to the current crisis in Ukraine. The U.S. focus on strengthening its military presence in the Asia-Pacific region, driven by concerns about China's assertiveness, risks provoking a security dilemma and undermining regional stability. Moreover, the U.S. tendency to prioritize its alliances over multilateralism raises concerns about its commitment to a truly rules-based international order. The U.S. has often bypassed international institutions like the United Nations when pursuing its foreign policy goals, preferring to act unilaterally or through coalitions of the willing. This undermines the legitimacy of international institutions and weakens the norms of international law. The U.S. must recommit to strengthening international institutions, upholding international law, and working through multilateral channels to address global challenges. The United States' influence isn't just about military and economic power. Soft power, through cultural appeal and values, shapes global perceptions. Recently, U.S. soft power has faced challenges, eroding its global influence. Domestic issues like political polarization and racial injustice tarnish its image. Foreign policy decisions, especially military interventions, damage its reputation. To restore soft power, the U.S. must address domestic issues and pursue multilateralism. Leading by example can help the U.S. regain its moral standing globally. The contradictions inherent in U.S. policy are not easily resolved. The tension between promoting its own interests and upholding universal values, between wielding power and respecting the sovereignty of other nations, is a constant challenge for U.S. policymakers. However, recognizing these contradictions is the first step towards addressing them and forging a more just and equitable world. The U.S. must reconcile its rhetoric with its actions, ensuring that its foreign policy is guided by the principles it espouses. This requires a fundamental shift in mindset, away from a narrow focus on national self-interest towards a more inclusive and cooperative approach to global affairs. The U.S. must prioritize diplomacy over militarism, multilateralism over unilateralism, and human rights over strategic expediency. Concretely, the U.S. should embrace a human rights-centered foreign policy, lead by example, recommit to multilateralism, pursue a less militaristic foreign policy, and promote sustainable development. By embracing these principles, the U.S. can begin to bridge the gap between its rhetoric and its actions, restoring its moral credibility and building a more just and equitable world for all. The task is daunting, but the stakes are too high to ignore. The future of humanity depends on the U.S. embracing a more responsible and principled role in the world. The United States stands at a crossroads. Its legacy is one of both progress and contradiction, of championing human rights while violating them, of promoting democracy while supporting authoritarian regimes. The U.S. has the capacity for immense good in the world, but its power is often wielded in ways that undermine its own values and interests. The path forward is clear. The US must reconcile its actions with its rhetoric, aligning its foreign policy with the principles it espouses. This requires a fundamental shift in mindset, away from a narrow focus on national self-interest, towards a more inclusive and cooperative approach to global affairs. The US must embrace a human rights-centered foreign policy, prioritize diplomacy over militarism, and recommit to multilateralism. The challenges are immense, but the stakes are too high to ignore. The US has a moral obligation to use its power responsibly and to work towards a more just and equitable world for all. The future of humanity may very well depend on it.